Welcome to another fabulous episode of My Orgasmic Life. And I'm excited to talk to you today about, first of all, two things. One, this episode is brought to you by tickle.life. Tee-hee. Second, I would really like it if you could support me in this adventure as you go forward listening to this epic show. Join my Patreon. That helps to support the cost of running this show. All right. So now full disclosure. I give you something, I'd like to receive something from you guys. All right. I would like some kind of support, whether that's Patreon, whether that's liking, sharing this podcast with somebody else, giving me testimonials, some way of contributing back to me as I contribute to you. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, let's lean into our topic today. I want to talk to you about why women manipulate. So, and when I say women, I mean anybody who anybody who identifies as female. And there's a reason behind this. So when I talk about manipulation, there's all sorts of different levels of manipulation. There's manipulating with our sexuality. There's manipulating to get what we need. Most of the time when people manipulate, it's usually out of a need for survival. And so I want to talk to you about, I want to give you a little bit of a herstory lesson, all right, of why on a deep DNA level, women use whatever they have at their disposal as a manipulation tactic instead of just communicating and being able to be straight up and say, this is what I want, and this, can you do this or you can't do this? And I think once you understand this concept, whether you happen to be a woman, it'll give us an opportunity for us to look at how all the ways in which we show up and we manipulate others around us. And if you happen to be spending time with women, you'll start to realize, oh, that's the motivator behind it. It's not just out of this pure, mean, manipulative, disrespectful space. It's often from a place of survival. And so once we understand that, we can course correct it. So throughout time, throughout history, throughout herstory, women have had, at one point in history, and not that long ago, I would say only maybe 50 years ago, so 5 years before I was born. That's right, I'm 45. That women had very little, if you had a vagina, you had very little options of empowerment, of, creating the life that you wanted to have, to being able to be successful. And the further we go back in time, once we hit patriarchal society, we had even less. So at one point, and not that long ago, we had 3 options. If you're a woman, you could, 1, become a prostitute, sex trade worker. 2, become a nun. That's not much fun. 3, get married. So we had 3 options for our survival. And I'm talking about our survival, like actual survival, being able to eat, being able to have a roof over your head, being able to actually be safe in any capacity whatsoever. And so when we drop into understanding that generation after generation after generation of women, we have been taught that the only way that we are going to get any kind of power for our own survival is to utilize I'm sorry I'm laughing because I'm talking about survival and I'm talking about all these things. And, again, no one, I just have to say this. Yes, let's just get it off the table. Yes, I have beautiful breasts and we don't need to talk about them because this is not appropriate. This is not the appropriate forum to talk about them. Okay? All right. Thank you. Moving on. right? See, I could utilize my breasts as a manipulation tactic if I wanted to get you to buy something or do something that I wanted you to do. But I'm trying to move from a non-manipulative way and not use my boobs as a way to manipulate others, or sexuality to manipulate others. Okay? All right, so let's drop back into that. All right, so where was I? Oh, so for women, we had only 3 options: being a nun, getting married, and being a sex trade worker. And so when we pass that along generation after generation after generation, now, luckily, if you happen to live in North America and you are not in a state of poverty, then we have, as women, we have more opportunities. We have more options so that we don't actually need to utilize those skill sets of survival using manipulation to survive. We don't need to do that anymore. But it's so ingrained in watching our mothers do it and watching our grandmothers do it and watching all the women as we grew up learning how to subtly to overtly manipulate others to get our needs met. Now, if you're living in other parts of the world and you are in a state of poverty, you still may need to use those skill sets in order to survive. If you're in an abusive relationship, you may need to use those skill sets to survive. And that's the sad part of this, is that, you know, wouldn't it be amazing to live in a world where everybody was equal, where everybody had opportunities, where everybody was allowed to be who they wanted to be and had all the possibilities available to create the life that they want to have? And that they didn't need to use their sexuality to get what they needed. And they didn't need to use subtle to overt manipulation tactics to get their needs met, so that they knew that they could have a roof over their head and that they were fed and that they were going to be safe from physical injury. Wouldn't that be an amazing world to live in? I would really love to live in that world. That's why I'm having this conversation, so maybe we can start to help for us all to live in that world. So that's the core, and the core reason why, as women, we manipulate. It's not typically from a malicious place. It's from a survival place and from an automatic response. So here's a great example. If as a woman, I were to just be straight up and say, hey, this is what I want. Now, that'd be great if I was allowed to do that. But imagine a world, which was not very long ago, and in some parts of the world is still going on, that if I were to ask for what I wanted, I could have been slapped across the face or beaten to an inch of my life because I had an opinion that was different from a man who was standing beside me. And if I needed to protect my children and wanted my children to have what I needed them to have, and I could just say, hey, you know, to my partner, to say, hey, yeah, you know, I think this is what we need to do, and this is what's in the best interest of my kids, and I was allowed to do that, I wouldn't need to manipulate. I could just say what I needed to do. But in a society, like I said, which in some places in the world and in some situations are still this is still exactly what it is. For me to actually get my needs met, I would have to manipulate, because if I didn't manipulate and push and make it, you know, plant the seed and stroke the ego and use my sexuality and all of these skills that were the only skills that I had at my disposal, if I didn't do that, I would be chastised, hit, abused, cut off, sold, all of these things. Well, guess what? You're going to learn really quickly how to get your needs met, not just for survival, but also for how do I, you know, expand my repertoire? How do I get a little bit of power? How do I get a little bit of control over my own life? So That's the reason. That's the root reason. Now, that doesn't mean that it's okay. And that doesn't mean that we should support manipulation. And that doesn't mean that any relationships that can be healthy are moving from a place of manipulation. But I think it's important for us to understand where it comes from and why it comes from. Thanks. I'm glad you're loving this, Leslie. That's awesome. So let's talk about how can we course correct this? How can we change the narrative from for women and make it safe for women and make a society where across the board, across the world, where it's safe for women to be able to communicate clear, clean, and efficiently. And to basically empower them and allow us space to be empowered, to be who we are, and to move in the world, and to not be objectified, not to be sexualized, not to be property, all of these things. Well, the first thing is that as women, we need to change how we move in the world. We need to be brave where it's safe to be brave. Okay. And I really recognize that there's still spots and places and experiences and relationships and places in even in our North American culture where it's not safe to do so. So it's important that, you know, this is where you're in an environment. Please, if you can, get to a safe environment. Do what you need to do to get to a safe environment. Okay. So I'm acknowledging that. It's really important. In order for us to create that world, everybody needs to start looking at why violence and abuse and domestic violence and domestic abuse, and we all need to start looking at that narrative and start changing those situations. We need to look at our education, and we need to poverty, and we need to look at all those things, all right? That's a bigger conversation for a different time, right? But for now, let's just start with, let's start as women to start to observe how, as a default, we manipulate others around us. That what we say is not what we mean. What we do is not, and how we show up in the world is not with the intention of what we're presenting. So it's really, really important for us to really start to acknowledge that and really be clean with that. And start to, you know, and the reason that I say this is that because I've been really noticing, as I've been really diving deeply into where this comes from historically, because I'm, you know, kind of a nerd that way. It gets me excited about, you know, cultures and society and how all that affects us and things like that. And so I've been diving really deeply into, you know, the history of women and you know, studying her story for a very long time. And so I decided over the last month or so, I was going to be like, oh, where are the places that I show up still, even though I know all of this? Where are the places that I show up where I'm not authentic, where I'm using my cleavage, for example, as a manipulation tool, where I am, you know, utilizing saying, you know, a cute tone so that I diffuse the situation, so I'm cute and adorable, so therefore I'm not a threat. Like, what are all the ways and what are all the tools around in which I manipulate the people around me, not even thinking about it, but just as a byproduct of what I've been taught. And it's been really fascinating to see all the places where I don't actually am with the people who I don't actually need to. You know, I have some spectacular people in my life. My A team is awesome. People in my life, I can be straight up, honest, clean, raw. I don't need to be anything other than what I am. And yet there's still that deeply ingrained piece around what I learned and to survive from generations and generations and generations and generations of women learning how to survive. So it's really fascinating when I start to observe that. And what I've found is as I observe it, I'm like, oh, okay. And I've told everybody in my life that this is what I'm doing, that I'm really working on changing the narrative around how I manipulate others, or how, as a woman, I'm changing that narrative, because I'm not in survival mode anymore. I happen to have created an amazing life for myself where my safety isn't dependent on the men that are around me. My safety is dependent on me. My financial stability is dependent on me. I've been able to create a life that is filled with safety. And so I don't need to move from that survival perspective. So what's happened is that I'll be cutesy in my using my manipulation tactics that are so ingrained into who I am. And they'll be like, wait, actually, that's not my intentions. I'm sorry. Here, this is what I want. This is why I want it. This is my motivator. And each time I do that, I change the pattern within myself. And also the people around me really appreciate that. They're like, all right, thanks. And it gives them the opportunity to be like really straight up and clean and clear. And so that all of our intentions are above board. So that's one way. Okay. So that's for us as women, what we can do. For everybody who doesn't identify as women who are listening to this, you know what you can do? One, make sure that you stop objectifying women. And there's some of you who are listening to me right now that are objectifying me right now. You know who you are. So stop doing that. Stop seeing me as an object. Stop seeing me as a piece of meat that is here for your sexual gratification. So that's the first place. Stop that. It's not consensual. I haven't agreed to it. It's not above board. Okay? So that's number one. Number two is that when you start to see and feel somebody in your life, a female in your life, somebody who identifies as a woman in your life, starting to utilize their sexuality as a way to manipulate you, or you're feeling like you're being manipulated in a situation, your ego's being stroked. These are kind of some of the indicators. Your ego's being stroked. They're making themselves less than so that you feel okay about yourself. All of these things. When you start to see that happen, especially from people that you love, I lovingly invite you to say, hey, you don't need to do that. You don't need to manipulate me to get what you want from me. Can you just ask me straight up what it is that you need right now from me? This will start to give the women around you permission to be like, oh, I don't need to do all of those steps. I don't need to be cute. I don't need to be sexual. I don't need to use my sexuality. I don't need to bribe you. I don't need to stroke your ego. I don't need to make myself small. I don't need that to get my needs met from you. Wow. That'll start to change the narrative in the world. So we can create this world where we don't need to do this anymore. We can course correct this thing that has happened for generations after generations after generations. So this is a very, 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 very exciting, conversation for us to have. And it's very important for us to lean into this. All right. So I hope you learned lots. I hope you're like, oh, okay, this is what's going on. How each one of us can change this narrative so that we don't need to move in this world where it's subterfuge and manipulation and out of survival, and also feeling like you're getting conned. That doesn't feel good either. It doesn't feel good to be on either side of that. It doesn't feel good to feel powerless, and my only option is to my only option is to utilize what I have to manipulate to get my needs met, because I feel like I don't have any other options. And it doesn't feel good to be on the receiving end of that. I feel conned and manipulated, and that feels icky too. So let's change that. Let's create a world where we don't need to live in that place. That we can live in a world where everybody's equal, everybody has their own say, everybody gets to contribute and engage with people in a way that they want to, that is based on consent, which is based on respect, which is based on safety. Okay? So that's what I want to leave you with. Good talk this morning. All right, so here are all the ways so that I'm not actually utilizing manipulation in any sort of way to get my needs met. First of all, please support me and the overhead cost of running this podcast and running this show. Join Patreon. That will help with that. Plus, you get some really beautiful bonus content and all sorts of juicy ways of engaging and interacting with me and having, private conversations and all sorts of juicy things. So, it's a win-win. You support the overhead costs of running this show, which helps me to be in that place of empowerment in my life and, helps me to pay my bills and to feed myself and do all those awesome things that need to happen. And in return, you get all this great content from me. So that's number one. Number two, another way that you can come and interact with me and support me and enjoy the show is to listen to the podcast on all of the podcasting platforms, whichever one is your favorite, whatever podcast platform is the way that you want to engage with me. So Spotify, Google, Apple, all of those pieces. Follow me on social media under Gaia Morrissette. That's another way. Send me some testimonials. Like if you're like, wow, this really changed my life. I want to hear it. This helps me show up for you guys. It helps me to be like, oh, that's good that somebody's listening. Right? So that makes me feel good. Helps you feel good, makes me feel good. If I help you feel good, let me know, okay? And you can visit me for any private one-on-one coaching. You can come see me and courses, all sorts of awesome things that I have going on at succulentliving.com. And and this fall, I have some exciting news. This fall, I have 2 exciting opportunities. And this is for everybody who identifies as female, okay? So first of all, I have a course that I'm developing right now called Manifesting Your Dream Relationship or Relationships. And we dive deep into how Hollywood, romance novels, society have affected our love and our sex beliefs and our relationships beliefs that may not be healthy and may not be serving you, which may be the problem with why you've been struggling with having the relationships, your dream relationship or relationships that you desire. So that's very exciting. So if you're interested in that, private message me. And then I'm also with a great co-host of mine and colleague and bestie, actually, Dana Ferhan. She and I are developing this incredible experience called Inner Goddess Activation. It's a full day experience. So, we're focusing on reconnecting to your divine feminine within, activating your feminine powers and then being empowered in your feminine and allowing your voice to be heard. So it's going to be epic. Again, you're interested in that? Please private message me and I'll get you on the list for all the details. All right. So that's it. That's all. I love you all. Thanks for spending time with me. Thanks for listening. And I hope your day and your weekend is filled with wonderful pleasure possibilities and really straight up honest conversations with people. All right. That's it. That's all. Bye-bye.